When I proposed the title for this talk to the ABC, I was worried about pushback. Fortunately, they were enthusiastic, suggesting only one editorial tweak. And that's why I'm here to declare Australia is freaking amazing. I'll leave you to guess what the first draft said. There are lots of ways in which we Aussies talk about our nation as being freaking amazing. The weather, our beaches, natural beauty, our lifestyle, mateship, and the rest of that well-worn list. And sometimes we dig deeper and add egalitarian norms and our multicultural tapestry and work-life balance. But I want to add an overlooked item to the list: our democratic and economic institutions. I'm going to forego Australian modesty to declare we're not just world-class, we're the world's best. My perspective is that of an Aussie who grew up here, wandered abroad and immersed himself in the economic and political life of the United States. I return home with some global perspective and a few credentials that let me claim economic insight. I'm also returning from the madness of the current American moment. That madness lends my message some urgency. Australia's institutions are rare, valuable, and worth defending. Now, let's step back. What do I mean by institutions? Put simply, they're the rules of the game. Our political institutions govern who we elect, how and what they can do, and how they shape our economic institutions, which governs how we do business with each other. Some institutions are formal, like our constitution, common law, and legislation. Others are informal, including our norms, traditions, and culture. My argument is that our institutions are the foundation of our prosperity. And let's be clear, Australia is rich. We're not the richest country in the world, but we're close. And if dollars don't move you, think about what they buy us: better health, longer lives, a social safety net, freedom from fear, poverty, and hunger. I made my mark as a younger economist, showing that richer countries are also happier countries, and Australia is no exception. Ours is an extraordinary nation that has enjoyed remarkable economic success. Now, it seems important to ask why. I'm posing a big question. We spend too much time on whether this indicator is up or that indicator is down. The RBA might do something, or the ASX just did something, and blah, blah, blah. The only thing missing from our economic discussion is the only thing that really matters. The central economic question, the one we discuss too rarely, is what drives Australian prosperity? To answer that, we're going to have to take on an even bigger question. What drives prosperity? Why are some countries rich and others poor? Now let's sketch the outlines of an economic framework. A production function conceives of an economy as like a mixing bowl. We toss in ingredients like machines and workers and skills. We stir and we bake the economic cake we call GDP. An exercise called development accounting asks why some countries bake more cake per person than others. And differences in the quality and quantity of ingredients are only a tiny fraction of the story. Something else explains Australia's baking prowess. If it's not the ingredients, it must be how we transform inputs into output. Now, this gets lots of names: efficiency, productivity, or technology. But I want you to think of it as recipes. Better recipes transform our inputs into more valuable output. Now, let's take sand. Sand is mostly silicon. For centuries, we used it to build sandcastles. Fun, beautiful, pointless. Then we learned that silicon conducts electricity, but only sometimes, which is another way of saying that silicon is a semiconductor. So now we use silicon to make computers. AI is a new recipe that uses those computers as ingredients to produce even more sophisticated output. The world didn't get more atoms. We just invented new ways to combine and use them. So, to summarize the story so far, the proximate sources of prosperity are people, machines, education, and most importantly, recipes. But there must be something more fundamental. After all, why do some countries make magnificent pavlovas while others get stuck with mini cupcakes? What are these more fundamental causes of prosperity? Now, developing and mastering a new recipe requires hard work, expertise, and practice. And so this pushes our question back a level. Why are people more willing in some countries to invest in developing, adapting, and adopting new recipes? I think the answer is institutions. I wish economists could test this miracle cure the way doctors do, by running a randomized control trial. I'd flip a coin. Heads, you get the good institutions. Tails, you're in my control group and you get a placebo. Sadly, no country signed up for my clinical trial. But sometimes history signs them up for us. Now, economic historian Douglas North argued that chance created an extraordinary natural experiment on the Korean Peninsula. When Japan surrendered at the end of World War II, Soviet troops accepted the surrender to the north of the 38th parallel, and American troops accepted it to the south. One people, one history, one culture, and a shared geography were suddenly divided by an invisible line. The key factor that differed across that line was the rules of the game governing economic and political life. In the north, Soviets dismantled industry, redistributed land, and installed a one-party state. In the south, democracy and markets gradually took hold. Decades later, a famous photo from space shows that invisible line is now visible. South Korea pulsates with light and activity. North Korea lies in darkness. Those lights tell an economic story. Different rules of the game led to different outcomes. Both Koreas began poor, but today the average income in South Korea is about $75,000, while in the north it's around $1,000, and hunger remains a constant companion. Now, you might hope that I could be more precise about telling you exactly which institutions make the difference, but so far, all I can say is it's better to be more like South Korea than North Korea. To get more precise, a generation of growth economists analysed the experiences of every country. They piled up data and let their computers loose, hoping to find the keys to prosperity. But it's not that simple. There's only a small number of countries, and there's a large number of possible causes. And correlation isn't causation. Still, a few patterns show through. Strong property rights ensure that you'll get to enjoy whatever cake you bake. Contracts make it easier to do business. Trust helps. Checks on power keep elites in line. Education expands what's possible. Financial systems fund growth and innovation. Trade opens up new markets, cheaper inputs, and new ways of doing things. So does immigration. Stability helps. Research and development is critical. Demographics count. Natural resources help, but sometimes they're a curse. So over the last few minutes, we've raced through half a century of economic research and at least 4 Nobel Prizes, including the one awarded earlier this week. Let's add one more. Last year's Nobel laureates provided a simpler classification. They argue that some institutions are inclusive, while others are extractive. Inclusive institutions reward you for baking more cake. Inclusive institutions like the rule of law, contracts, and open competition ensure that if you invest, you'll reap the rewards. The flip side is extractive institutions. They are how elites grab instead of bake cake. They siphon state revenues, seize assets, block competition, smother innovation, centralize power, exploit labor, and silence dissent. The result is less cake, but bigger slices for powerful insiders. By this story, institutions matter because they shape incentives. Good institutions channel ambition into productive work, investment, and invention, into baking more cake rather than fighting over it. Does this theory work for Australia? I reckon it does, and a simple comparison makes the point. Argentina's not quite our twin, but it may be our long-lost brother. At the time of federation, Australia and Argentina looked remarkably similar. Big, resource-rich, sparsely settled countries, each distant from much of the world, yet plugged in to British trade and finance. Back then, you might have guessed, we were equally poised for prosperity. Australia launched a bold experiment in inclusive institutions. We shared economic and political power broadly, and we're all shareholders in that great Australian enterprise. We built wealth from productive agriculture, industrialised what it mattered, and kept moving up the value chain. Today, we're a knowledge-based economy that excels in higher education, medical research, geoscience, finance, and tourism. But Argentina's story is less happy. Elites captured its late 19th century riches. They rewrote the rules to keep those riches, stifling innovation and competition. Democracy was fragile and in a constant battle with populists and the military. The story of Argentina's economy matches that of their soccer team. Both got messy. Their institutions weren't up to the job. A revolution, a civil war, a coup, followed by a coup, and a coup. The result? Multiple depressions, recurring hyperinflations, and more debt defaults than World Cups. The contrast today is striking. The average Australian earns more than twice as much as the average Argentine. We live longer, we're healthier, and we're happier. Of course, this is only a partial description. None of this has worked well for First Nations Australians. This exception is telling. Our institutions were not inclusive of them, and our economy hasn't delivered for them. Even so, whatever put us on our path rather than Argentina's is worth treasuring. I think it's our mostly inclusive institutions. And so my next task is to make the case that Australia's institutions are world-leading. Now, if you follow the news, that might seem preposterous. We're bombarded by bulletins of broken institutions, power-hungry politicians, dysfunction and deadlock debate, and the maddening, muddy messiness of democracy. But travel the world, and you'll get a different perspective. Australia's rules aren't perfect, but just about every other country is imperfect. Our elections are a wonder we take for granted. They're held on the weekend so everyone can vote. By contrast, the Brits pick Thursdays, the Yanks chose Tuesdays, and Canadians do it on Mondays. We all vote because we have to. Growing up, that just felt normal. It isn't. It's radical. We're the only English-speaking democracy to require it. Compulsory voting works. It takes turnout off the table. That makes it harder for money to sway votes. Australian politicians don't fire up the base to goose turnout. Instead, they try to persuade, which is the productive side of democratic discourse. Voter intimidation doesn't work when you have to vote. And in Australia, there's no silent majority. When we vote, it's in wobbly cardboard booths that protect your privacy. That's another Aussie innovation. Our secret ballot ensures that your boss can't tell you how to vote. Party leaders can't bully you. Neighbours can't judge you. And a crooked politician can't buy your vote because they can't verify you'll deliver. Your ballot paper? Also an Australian invention. It's more private than a shouted yay or nay, and more democratic than handing in tickets printed by party bosses. No Australian election has ever been won by a butterfly ballot or a hanging chad. Every adult can vote. That's now standard. But we led the charge. We never had poll taxes or literacy tests. The diggers at the Eureka Stockade demanded and eventually got near universal male suffrage. Women were granted the right first by our friends in New Zealand, but we quickly followed. And we were the first to add the right to run. We were slower, shamefully slower, in recognising Indigenous voting rights. In Australia, you don't have to remember to enrol to vote. If the Electoral Commission can find you, they'll add you. You don't need ID. Our lines are short. Add a democracy sausage and a chat with the neighbours, and voting is a stress-free staple that feeds both our stomachs and our democracy. Your electorate is determined by the Australian Electoral Commission, an independent body that draws fair boundaries, maintains the rolls, and runs elections with no partisan goal. It feels obvious to us, but in many other countries, it feels impossible. The payoff is that voters pick their politicians, while gerrymandering lets American politicians choose their voters. As a result, we get more competitive races and more responsive politicians. In Australia, we number the boxes on the ballot. That's preferential voting, another Aussie invention. Others thought of it, but we were the first to do it. Much of the rest of the world uses first past the post, where a vote for a third party is wasted. We don't waste votes, we redistribute them. We deliver on the promise of one vote, one value. Trump would never have won under our system. It can be hard to remember how much Republicans loathed him in 2016. He only won the Republican primary because Ted Cruz, John Kasich, and Marco Rubio split the anyone but Trump vote. The problem isn't that Trump won. It's that his win was due to the ego of his rivals rather than the will of the people. And in the general election, another vanity candidate, Jill Stein, may have siphoned enough votes from Hillary Clinton to send Trump to the White House. Okay, at this point, we've elected our politicians. What comes next? Now, the next bit can feel a little undemocratic. Our politicians organise into parties, and within those, into factions. They wheel and deal and decide who does what, including who gets to be Prime Minister. Sometimes the party also gives its members a voice. It sounds odd, but there's actually an upside to this. Our PM is chosen by folks who spent hundreds of hours with them and whose own political futures rise or fall with the government's success. Our politicians almost always vote the party line, and inside the party, the factional line. This actually makes our institutions more responsive because there are fewer veto players and hence less gridlock. And factional and party leaders and specialist deal makers, they're constantly weighing and competing interests and electoral consequences. Strong party unity doesn't destroy democratic deliberation. It just moves it from the parliament to the party room. Our lower house is dominated by two parties. That may not feel like much choice until you look abroad, where fragile coalitions collapse and rarely deliver either stability or reform. We've got the upper house for deliberative review. I'm not going to argue that Tasmania deserves as many senators as New South Wales, but if that's the price of federalism, I'll pay it. The threat of a double dissolution prevents the upper house from becoming a gridlock house. The ease with which prime ministers can be replaced led us to churn through a few too many a bit too quickly. The parties responded with new rules to slow the roll. Even so, it's not so bad. In America, we have the opposite problem. We spend a lot of energy worrying about what happens when a leader's mental health or physical health deteriorates. In Australia, we know they'll be knifed in the party room. Our cabinet, which exercises executive power, is drawn from the parliament. This fuses the legislature with the executive, so when parliament wants something done, it happens. Our independent public service gives us continuity and advice without fear or favour. I'd take our career professionals any day of the week over the rookies inside the current White House. Though, Obama shows us there's something to a system that can recruit external talent like economist Larry Summers, Nobel physicist Stephen Chu, Pulitzer Prize winner Samantha Power. It's a pity there's no Olympics for political and economic institutions. It would focus the mind of our sports-mad nation. And it might shift your sense of Australian greatness from the sporting field to the economic and political stage. While there's no gold medals, there are plenty of global scorecards. International organisations regularly rank countries on governance, state capacity, and the quality of their institutions. We consistently rank near the top. If this were the Olympics, we would be in almost every final, and teams that make finals bring home hardware. I reckon there's a good chance we'd top the medal count. So what do we get for all of this? First, prosperity. Good institutions constrain bad impulses and empower productive ones. Second, stability. The world changes, yet Australia keeps being great. Our institutions permit us to be nimble and we adapt. And third, trust. Our institutions work because we trust them, and we trust them because they work. A couple of recent episodes prove the point. The global financial crisis was a once-in-a-century shock that tested the world. Wall Street cratered, fear was contagious, banks collapsed, factories closed, and unemployment soared. Worse, in most countries, the economic damage persisted for years. But Australia wrote a different story. Among advanced economies, only Australia and Switzerland emerged relatively unscathed. The crisis dealt us a smaller blow because of our sound banks and our strategy of diversifying into Asia. And we cushioned it better than most with a response that was timely and textbook: fiscal stimulus paired with rate cuts. Euromoney magazine named Wayne Swan Finance Minister of the Year. Deservedly so, but his job was easier than his foreign counterparts. Obama started with a modest stimulus, assuming that Congress would approve a follow-up if it was required. It was required, but Tea Party protests killed it. And in Europe, textbook prescriptions were discarded for the bitter medicine of austerity, which didn't work. We only had to wait 12 years for our next once-in-a-century shock. When COVID hit, our government responded swiftly and with ingenuity. National Cabinet was born, elevating our response above the partisan fray. Look, you know the rest. Our downturn was among the mildest, and our death toll among the lowest. Our institutions delivered on our values. We looked out for each other, and we looked to experts for guidance. No one drank bleach. And when the vaccines came, we said thank you. The vaccine stroll out was a major blunder, but still we emerged with our health, our prosperity, and trust in institutions, including science. These episodes show that Australia's institutions work. Now, I'll admit there is something irritatingly upbeat about the argument that I've been making. Policy discourse is normally about our failures. That's because we're always looking to see what we might improve. Implicitly, that's comparing the reality of Australia to its potential. And we always fall short. But I've engaged in a different argument. I'm comparing the messy reality of Australia with the even messier reality elsewhere. Mine is a comparative claim. And when you compare us to others, we often come out on top. As I say that, I realise that I've accidentally made a case for radical conservatism. If you accept Australia's institutions as the foundation of our prosperity, you want to protect them, conserve them. It's conservatism, but a radical conservatism, because it's about preserving a set of institutions that put the power in the hands of the punters over the elites. It's an idea that feels especially urgent right now. Trump hogs the headlines, but democracy is under attack all around the world. Populists and autocrats have fueled and fanned voter anger. Australia hasn't followed suit yet. But I worry the precursor to these moments, zero-sum thinking, may be on the rise. We've seen these forces take hold before, and they never lead to prosperity. Managing technological transformation and global upheaval requires strong institutions. If there's a moment to more stoutly defend what we've got, it's now. We can be the shining city on a hill. To be clear, I'm not suggesting we conserve our institutions in aspect. Rather, we ought to conserve and enhance their inclusive goo. The recent RBA reforms provide a useful example. Australia's monetary policy used to be set by a board of toffs from the top end of town who brought neither democratic legitimacy nor macroeconomic expertise to the table. They're now gone. Their boardroom tales have been replaced by experts who carefully parse data on the experiences of all Australians. Even so, I find it a little uncomfortable to make a case for conservatism. I can feel my stepfather, who was a fierce advocate for change, staring down from atheist heaven, unimpressed. He was no conservative, and I wasn't raised to become one. But I reckon we could have had a chat. He might have been more persuaded if I described my argument as one for conservative radicalism. The conservative bit is to respect the rules. He was a reformer, driven to lift up those left behind, to spread opportunity and restore dignity. Were he alive today, he'd worry about stagnating income, widening inequality, unaffordable housing, and worker exploitation. He would want reform, maybe even radical reform. And that's the crux of the matter. Our institutions can deliver it. Look, not as well as most Aussies want, but better than just about anywhere else. Think about the issues that have paralysed our peers. Workable federalism, access to affordable and high-quality health insurance, land rights, tariff reform, unsustainable pension systems, tax reform, gun reform, fiscal sustainability, disability insurance and carbon taxes. In each case, an Aussie PM picked the issue up and solved it. In real time, it can feel slow and piecemeal and frustrating, but stack it up and it adds up to a remarkable record of reform. Let's pull the threads together. I've argued that 1, Australia has world-leading institutions. 2, institutions determine prosperity. And hence 3, our world-beating institutions are the source of Australian prosperity. That's my case for a radically conservative and conservatively radical Australia. And the animating observation behind it all is the insight we speak too rarely. Australia is freaking amazing. Thank you.